Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first roundtable being hosted by the Environmental and Social Issues Cluster in Nickel and Dimed. We wish to use this discussion to delve deeper into the topics from the environmental and social realm that are multifaceted due to the several complexities and layers that they hold. Today, we have with us the columnists from this cluster, namely Krishanu, Noor, Shreya, Ashika, and Ryosha. The topic in focus for today is intersectionality in environmental engagement. The relationship between man and environment has never been constant, but shaped through historical, social, and political transformations over time. It isn't something that occurs naturally, but something that is constructed by us. The importance of how we view nature reflects not only in our understanding of it, but also on how we act towards it. Evidently, everyone's role in society is based on their identities along the lines of class, caste, and gender. This establishes that everyone perceives nature differently and thereby engages with it differently. Through this roundtable, we will be highlighting the different ways in which the different sections of the society engage with environment and its resources. I'd like to thank our moderators, Ashika and Ryosha, for preparing the questions for today, and I'll let them take over the session now.
To begin, we can start off by looking at how a global economic phenomena has affected the rich and poor, and what implications it has on how people interact with environmentalism, if it has any implications at all.
Okay, all right. I think it's globalization has had twin effects on. There's a duality of globalization and its impact, especially the people who had prior social capital and economic capital could do well because of globalization. For them, globalization was that accelerator for economic growth. But for the people who lacked resources such as that things which could be used as input in a globalized world, because there are certain skills which are much useful in a technocratic globalized world than other skills. So people who are lacking in those skills, namely basically people coming from sections of the society which lack economic capital, social capital, educational capital, especially those people, they could not actually go on up the ladder. And that was probably because there were few people who were already much ahead of them in the ladder. So I think globalization is that sort of a phenomena in which there is a duality of impact, which is very different uh, for the poor and for the people who come from high income families.
Thanks, Krishanu. We have Shreya next.
So globalization is, I think, actually to me how the rich perceive the environment, right? Because globalization is what they got out of being able to interact with the integrated markets, and to them, understanding of integrated markets allows globalization basically allows you to integrate markets, which increases competition and improves efficiency of companies. The way they improve efficiency of companies is by reducing the costs they associate with production, and they help reduce wastage of resources or efficiency of resources. But all this is just theory. In the end, how the rich connect with the environment ends up being through usage of extra land, which otherwise would have been for tribal communities, poor communities, which were before using those areas, but now it's taken by the rich or the people who are part of the integrated global markets, because they're able to take away the land from the poor. It's a wastage of resources. It's that's why like the Amazon forests are completely burnt out because of such globalization activities. And it is in the end how the rich perceive the world, and that's why I think in terms of globalization, it's affected the poor a lot, because communities which were based on cultures and traditions which were integrated with the environment, like the Ladakhi culture, basically involved integration with the environment. It worked with the environment, but their community, because of globalization, was completely destroyed. They had to they had to succumb to the pressures of reduced prices, so they couldn't sell their handmade products. They had to succumb to the pressures of mass production, which they couldn't compete with. So as a result, their whole community, which was based on like self-preservation, it was only based on working for themselves, completely disintegrated. So globalization, while it has its perks in helping us get cheaper economy and so on, it actually had a lot of bad impact on the poor. So I think the way globalization works is basically for the richer and the well-to-do, and it actually affects the poor.
Shreya, I had a question. You were talking about globalization as exclusively for like the upper class, right? And that locally they are kind of self-preserved. So, what is the link between these two like phenomenon? Is there some sort of link, or are they like completely separate, completely different, exclusive from each other?
No, so there is a link. So now, so that it used to be, my understanding of it used to be separate, but because of the current global warming, the climate changes which are occurring, people are actually taking into account the fact that we're wasting a lot of resources. The fact that there's a crisscross of resources, such as you can get apples in India, but people are going all the way to New Zealand, crisscrossing those apples just to get into India, and realizing the impact of such a transportation on the environment. So people are understanding the importance of like combining localization and globalization. So localization is producing at home, in your home terrain at home, but globalization is integrated markets. So before it used to be separate, but now with farmers markets are coming up. So in San Francisco, apart from supermarkets, they're also coming up with something called farmers markets, which works with local producers. So side by side, they're working with the supermarket and the farmers market to integrate the two, so that you do not lose out on the benefits of globalization, but at the same time, you're not pushing down your local community. So is like the Avani community, which is working with tribal communities to help them improve their traditions and compete with the global markets. So help them create environmentally free, give work to the rural people and create environmentally free products. And by doing so, they integrate the local community into the global community, but at the same time preserving the local community. So there is coming out integration of local and globalization. You can't do one without the other. It can't be that it can be only localization or only globalization. And people are realizing that now with the coming climate change and so on. So they're integrating the two markets. So it's not completely exclusive.
Yeah,
It does.
I was just thinking because when Yosha, do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just thinking when you're talking about the local in localization, you talked about tribal groups and those are the poor communities. I was thinking if you were to think about, just to take the discussion forward, in India, when you mention local, you can not mention caste, because caste is definitely a part of the local in India. So if you were to kind of talk about the relation between class and then if you mix caste into it, what kind of relationship does that form then? What kind of relationship does such groups have then with the environment? Would anyone like to take that up?
Yep, I'd like to take that up. I think Shreya's point about localization provides a very smooth segue into talking about how environmentalism and this globalization and localization does not only create a rift between the poor and the rich. I mean, it does integrate, it's slowly integrating as well, but not only does it create a rift between the rich and poor, it is responsible for maintaining the clear caste hierarchy that is in India. So, in Indian environmentalism, at least, what we notice is that it's often described as the environmentalism of the poor or indigenous environmentalism, but it's still quite problematic because if we look at the language of the movement, Indian environmentalism often romanticizes traditions, emphasizing on how traditions have always maintained harmony with nature and how they've always laid a lot of importance on sustainable development. And even like one example would be a UN Secretary General's report of 2010, Harmony with Nature, which actually romanticized Vedic philosophy, the Mahabharata, the Upanishads, and more Hindu texts, citing ecological balance and how they, promoted ecological balance. But in this process, we often end up romanticizing caste. We don't explicitly do it, but like when we talk about this maintaining harmony with the nature, we most definitely end up romanticizing caste, because this harmony with the nature crucially dependent on economic and social work divided on caste basis. So there's a quite popular new traditionalist ideology, which is rampant in Indian environmentalism. And according to this traditionalist discourse, ecological problems are exclusively seen as a colonial problem or a modern problem, and thus they sort of allude back to going back to customs and going back to our traditions and going back to our roots and rediscovering Hinduism. A lot of Indian environmentalism hinges on that. And it's also like a lot of us would have noticed that often Gandhi's traditionalism is evoked in these conversations. How Gandhi romanticized the idea of a self-sufficient village, right? And his idea of maintaining harmony and being self-sufficient. But we all know how casteist Gandhi's views have been at a point. His idea of the self-sufficient village is quite casteist, and at the same time, we rarely ever hear popular important people like B.R. Ambedkar's view on environmentalism. They're they're never they're never popularly discussed as you know they're not popularly discussed in the environmentalist discourse. Now, the practical consequences that we see of this, like we have this neo traditionalist ideology and the language which is blatantly casteist, but it also results in practical casteist consequences. For example, there was the forest revival project launched by the WWF India, which involved planting trees along an 11-kilometer pilgrim route, while and it also targeted the inadequate sewage system. But at the same time, the traditional system was romanticized and proposed to be brought back. And what was this traditional system? In this traditional system, Dalits and lower castes had to carry the night soil, which was basically human excreta, on their heads and dispose it off. So this system was romanticized, and while there were attempts to improve the sewage system was never adequately developed, because it was never even given importance, because we have this traditional system to depend on, right? Now we also have a very popular environmentalist, Bindeshwar Pathak, who launched the Sulabh Sauchalya movement. And even he, quite regularly romanticizes Gandhian philosophy, and he also has quite casteist language. He insists on using, Harijan as a term for the lower caste, while it is quite problematic, and lower castes themselves do not prefer this term to be used. But besides that, he launched the Sulabh Sauchalya movement, and a primary aim of the movement was to help Bhangis and improve their working conditions. But the point remains that even though a lot of new toilets were a lot of new toilets were established, what we really see is that this just gives them an alternate employment, which is still seen as menial or deplorable by the higher castes. And what we see is, for example, the Sulabh Sauchalya movement, the organization the organizational work is mainly done by upper castes, while all these menial or deplorable work is still done by the lower caste. So while their working conditions have increased, the caste system remains intact. So these were some examples of how the popular environmentalism is blatantly casteist, and this never comes up to the surface because on superficially we are working towards everyone's betterment, but behind under the surface, uh, this environment this environmentalism crucially depends on the caste structure. Does anyone have any questions or responses?
No, I was just thinking, so does that mean like casteist environmentalism is like purely local in India? Like there is no way for it to integrate kind of into the global. Like I was just bringing back Shreya's point of how lower classes are kind of integrating into the global market a little bit. There's a mix of both. But with relation to India and with relation to caste, there's such kind of link has not yet formed, right? As of yet, it's always in India. Most of the environmentalist movements have remained solely to India. Attention received only probably in India. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. If anyone has any other comments.
Um, I think just to add in here, right? So I feel like we forget that environmental movements in themselves are political acts. So they are not, while they're always like, aiming to achieve something, they're doing so in politicized ways. So there will be, aspects of it that will not suit the a section of the society. So the point that that India's environmental movement has not been very global, and is obviously firstly how deep caste runs in our society and in our country is not very prominent in other countries, right? So in America we have environmental racism that is very evident, but not so much of environmental casteism. And it in fact this pattern is kind of prevalent in like every different environmental movement, or in fact every different movement which is to do with like certain sections of the society. So we may think that if only a certain caste of people are being pushed to do a certain kind of job, even in today's world, as Ryosha was talking about how it's a traditionalist idea and concept to not never develop sewage systems, because you have the Dalits to carry the human excreta, which is in today's real life time converted into manual scavenging, right? We're supposed to be, according to the constitution, we're supposed to be resorting to manual scavenging only as like the end method of cleanliness. But the thing is that our system doesn't even think of alternate ways in which we can dispose human excreta. And therefore we may think that if labor and work is so highly defined by cost and is so dominated by access to commons, then labor and environmental movements in India might be getting along. But there's also a clear distinction between the blue and the green movements. So the blue being the blue collared employee movement in India, that everything to do with labor and working conditions, and green being solely environmental movements. It's another topic of how why there is such a clear divide. But I think one main reason is that even these movements in themselves are very political, and therefore they are going to stick to a certain kind of hierarchy that favors the people leading that movement. So if the elite, if the rich of the country are leading forward with the environmental movement and they don't see labor as a factor in it, then it's not going to integrate and they are going to remain separate, as has been the case in India.
Thank you. That was a very valuable input. And talking about all the, class divide, caste divide, and even racism, I think that also deeply affects how people interact with commons, how like your social position, your economic position, your caste position affects deeply how you interact with commons. So does anyone have a response to that?
I can go ahead. Yeah, I think commons are, because they are so commonly accessible to people. They are quite obviously neglected. People, uh, they interact differently and derive different things from the commons, different people, and this is mainly due to differential access to resources and the entrenched inequality that exists, right? But these are things that are guaranteed to us rather implicitly by the fundamental right to life, like right to water, a right to good quality air to breathe, or right to shelter. All of these come under the right to life, right? So these are the things that we all deserve because they are fundamental rights that are guaranteed to us, right? So basically, when we look at commons, two very stark things we can explore and dissect, and basically look at it from the point of view of slum and non-slum settlements, right? So in case of water, we can see that about 17% of urban population, they live in slums, and about half of them, they don't have tap water within their reach. So 46 to 50%, they don't have tap water within their reach, right? And there are three types of slums. Okay, there are three types of slums. One is identified, the other one is recognized, and the other one is notified. And only the recognized slums uh, can avail water, can avail piped water, right? And this is from a study by BK Satapathy in 2014 that came out. In Mumbai, it is different. Like there is a cutoff date. Like if families have come to the slum areas prior to 2000, only then they can avail piped water in the slums. But the fact is that this cutoff date doesn't exist for non-slum areas. So this is something that is very stark. That you're talking about something as basic as water, and there is differential laws governing two different localities of the same urban landscape, right? Then there is another disparity in water supply. There is like around 150 liter per capita supply is given to uh, a non-slum area, whereas a third of it, like around 35 to 40 liter per capita, is given in slums. So that is quite stark as well. Another paper by Visakha Banshal, she argues how religious disparity also comes into the accord. That certain slums only, there are certain Muslim localities which are not given the same amount of water or the benefits as Hindu localities or slums. So this all works into the differential access to something as basic as water, as common as water. And putting this into context of the pandemic, it is hard to imagine how people in slums can maintain or adhere to hand washing, etc., where they have intermittent water supply, where it comes for just 2 or 3 hours a day. It's very hard to think how these people that constitute 70 to 20% of the population of the country are going to maintain these COVID norms. And lastly, I'd like to talk about air. It's when you talk about air, it's basically air pollution, right? In India, it's about 83, the air quality index. In Delhi, it's around, average is around 100. In Sonipat, near our university, it's 158, which is severe. 158 air quality index, right? So it has killed more Indians in 2019 than any other risk factor. There's a study by New York Times that they published in 2020. They also they published a survey in which they did pilot surveys on two kids. One who was living in a purified surroundings, and the other who was living around non-purified surroundings. And it was found that the person who was living in non-purified air surroundings uh, inhaled 4 times as much pollution as the other one. and it actually impacted their life chances by 5 factor, which means that it reduced their say it reduced their the amount of life number of their age, basically life expectancy by 5 years. So that is quite a thing, right? For something as basic as air, is something that has been so differentially accessed because of inequality, right? And putting it into perspective of coronavirus, in Delhi, which is like one of the highest populated cities in the country, right? Who has come into the thing, and they have said that those with underlying respiratory diseases are more susceptible to COVID-19 damage, and we can certainly see links, because Delhi is the third highest state in terms of deaths, right? And is also one of the most polluted cities in the country. So there is certainly a link between lung damage, already present lung damage, and the deaths occurring due to coronavirus. So we can see therefore that these, when we talk of commons, as basic things as commons like air and water, and these affect people because of the inequality, entrenched inequality. And certainly it's not a level playing field, it's not a great equalizer. The pandemic is definitely not a great equalizer, and it is, and we can find this, we can analyze this by just analyzing things as basic as water and air. That is what I'd like to say.
But yeah, so Trishana, you were talking about, you gave the example of air pollution in Delhi. And I'm just thinking that, with the way India's population is rising, and, we see that everyone wants to shift to an urban place, intra nation migration is very high in India, where not only the poor, it's not just the poor who are moving to urban spaces to look for better work, but also the middle class and the rich. They're moving from like smaller cities to Delhi and Bombay, and to accommodate for these people, to accommodate for this booming population, Delhi has to construct more. Okay, whether that be in terms of residential buildings, whether that be in terms of you know more spaces, public spaces, hospitals, and even more commons, like not just environmental commons, but like public institutions. It has to build, it has to grow. And do you think that the population is the reason why commons are depleting even more, and there's such an exclusion? So obviously, I mean, we've established that there's going to be there is a hierarchy in society, and that determines a lot in the way people have access to and engage with environment. But like when there's this new urban space and there's an influx of population, is it the overpopulation, or is it some other factor that's then determining what happens to the commons?
I think that's a good question regarding overpopulation. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can.
See, what I think is that basically for economic growth, one of the factors is migration, right? When it even if it is like people from low income background going to high income localities in search for job opportunities. But when we talk about things which are guaranteed to us in the form of fundamental rights, right? These are things that the state has to work out to provide to its people, right? And when we talk of air, air can never be less for people, right? It's the quality of air. And to control the quality of air, there are certain practices that need to be undertaken, especially in the northern areas of the country, right? In the southern regions of the country, we can see, even though they are as populated, we can see that the pollution level is far less, right? In around Kerala, it's way too less in compared to Delhi and other regions. There are other factors as well contributing to this degradation in air quality, like you have stubble burning, etc., especially in the ones starting from October, which just decreases the air quality to drastic levels. and it has great consequences to people. So I don't think it's directly a matter of overpopulation that is a great concern for the degradation in commons, but I think it's a matter of short-term policy, and I think policy short-sightedness that is mainly the cause for the problems that are in hand encircling the commons, right? Air, water, etc. Like for talking about water, if I could just add this thing, just little thing, that we can see there is a disparity when it comes to water, right? Even if they are legal citizens of the land, right? You can't be a legal citizen of your legality of being a citizen of India cannot change even if you are in Delhi or if you're in Kerala, right? You are a citizen of India. So in terms of that, the disparity that exists, that only 30 liters or 40 liters of water per capita is provided, where your urban non-slum counterpart gets about 150 per capita liter. I think it points out to nothing but policy short-sightedness and problems in execution.
No, you can go ahead.
Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I just had a point to add, like in regards with the common grounds and the projects that we have for conservation. Like for example, if we take the project Tiger, right? So it was basically to increase the tiger population in a lot of areas, and the those living in the outskirts, or depending on those forests as their livelihood, were promised rehabilitation and funds. However, the entire when you're like they almost like at this point sort of hate environmental movements because they affect them so much, and they are not they do not receive the rehabilitation they are promised. As in, like, it also because it entirely changes the the food web, because once the tiger populations increased, the deer population reduced, which also led to the more like because the population reduced, they saw a more more growth in a particular flower that used to sort of take away from their agricultural land, right? Which also reduced their personal the food consumption that they had. So I think it's not just the not just the problems that obviously come from the low funding or the lack in rehabilitation that is provided to these people, but also the fact that just like these tiny changes, or like taking away from their common lands, is like entirely changes their livelihood. So that is why people, lower caste people or tribes and all of these people almost have started despising these conservation movements.
I was just thinking, yeah, kind of related to what Noor was saying. I think Krishanu's point kind of implicitly brought out another form of segregation, which is space itself, because you're classifying it as slum areas versus non-slum areas. You're showing the difference in commons through that as well, but a different kind of difference, not only related to population, but also related to the fact that the few people who have the choice and can afford certain spaces do so, right? So differential access to commons, one explanation was brought up by Vanchika, which is through population. And the other aspect is because they can, because they can afford it. So in this handful of people, they consume certain commons more than those who can't. So I think we could take the discussion forward in that direction if anyone has any points.
Just like to simplify, I think what Ashka is referring to is would be to look at the example of the bottled water industry. So how even within slums and like areas, you have like this limit to the amount of water that they can consume, and like a certain like illegal charge being imposed of them if they were to access water. But the thing is that we have that even the other section of the society which consumes water, let's say through bottled water, are paying for it. So one might just say that what's so unfair. You have that these slum areas are being provided water at a charge, but at the same time, when I go to like say when I'm going on a trip, I buy bottled water and I'm paying for water too. So what is the discretion, like what is the line of control that we're drawing?
Uh, I think there is definitely a class difference overarching this commons thing, and I was reading this study by the center itself. which they did on Kapashera, it it said basically it had undertones of how water has turned into a commodity and how expensive water is. Like it's a common resource, right? Even if it's a common resource, how expensive it is for the people who are residing there. And the reason I say it's class difference is because the people who are residing there are people from low income families, low income backgrounds, right? So they have to spend a large chunk of their disposable income on something as basic as water, right? About 800 to 1000 rupees a month for a person who earns maximum 10,000 rupees. And it's all in the study, which is like 1/10 of their entire monthly thing, barring like other stuff they have to spend on food ration, etc. They have to spend on water alone. So I think the dynamics of, you know, the need, right? Dynamics of need and money is very different when it comes to accessing commons for rich and the poor. Class differences, basically.
Yeah, adding on to that point, I think there is also a difference in the way the two are perceived. But I mean, for for like those who are getting it for free, it is being given as a need, right? It's like a need that they need for their survival. However, for those who are buying bottled water, I mean, sometimes it's not at all. They don't either. Like it could have two parts. Either they don't have an option. For example, the entire argument about environmental racism, basically certain localities that are closer to um these power plants or whatever, which have which sort of dispose their toxic waste into the water that is later being consumed by these people. These people don't really have an option to sort of you have the water, you are being supplied the water, the water, but is it sort of, can you really consume it? No. So you are sort of forced to rely on the bottled water. Moreover, for those who are sort of who have the capacity to buy bottled water, a huge part is also being played by all the industries that are a part of commodification of water, who sort of brand it in a way that, okay, this is from the Himalayas, or all the packaging and everything that goes into getting people to buy those resources. So there are like two sides to the story. There is one part who is being forced to sort of take these resources because they have no other option, and the other who is sort of being influenced, and because ultimately consumers don't really have a choice, right? I mean, you would say that buying cars is not obviously buying cars is not the most environmental friendly option for like anyone. But then the thing is that public transport, governments want people to buy more cars for the growth of the GDP. Like they would close down, I mean, in the US, for example, journalists talk about how Americans love cars, but the fact is that people, like the government sometimes was a part of closing down public transport just to, and making better roads just to motivate people to buy more cars. So I mean, there are there are entire ways in which consumer sovereignty is sort of diminished because of all of these factors.
Yeah, Vanchika, and then Shreya.
Shreya, why don't you go first? I'll go after you.
Yeah, okay, cool. I just want to like add on to, like, I completely agree with everyone saying, because that's the crux against globalization, right? Because the whole point is that just because they have the ability and the money to change a common such as land into something which is commoditized, which they can have authority over and strip people of their homes, is the whole crux behind why people do not agree with globalization. It's something which is supposed to be for everyone, is taken and made for only a particular group of people who have the ability, who have the resources to make it for themselves only, which is what affects the whole problem. And I think that's why localization picked up in such a big way, because it gave people a chance to fight against these people who have some power in their hands, and give it to the rest of the community to say that they can also fight for what is theirs. And commoditizing something as simple as land or water, which is for everyone, is why localization is trying to put down globalization and fight against the two to make it more integrated so that everyone has a say. So I completely agree with what everyone's saying too.
I think, I mean, I understand, Noor's point of how consumption is so powerful. yet not really in the hands of the consumer, because it's firms play such a huge role in like manipulating people to believe certain things. There have been a lot of instances of greenwashing where firms may portray themselves to be really ethical, but in terms of both environment and social, in terms of both saying that, oh, we treat our workers properly and the environment properly, but that actually never being the case. So you see that consumers get manipulated really easily. And I think as of now, we've sort of divided our discussion to, the rich and the poor. So, we have the rich almost don't have a choice, like Noor was saying. The poor almost don't have a choice. And, for the rich, it's because they can do so. I'm thinking about, this third section of the society, which, is the middle class. And where exactly do they fall in the way they engage with environment? In fact, I don't think we hear about middle class environmentalism enough in theory or in the papers or even in like recent examples. It's always that the rich are exploiting it, the poor are getting exploited. So does anyone want to comment on that?
The middle class point, I think, at least from my perspective, would be kind of a mix. So first, I think defining middle class is hard. Right? It has been contested a lot. So there has been, what at least in India, it's, I think, if you spend around $2 to $10, it's considered, you're considered to be in that bracket. So, and there has been transition right from the beginning of since 1991, when India started opening up. That's when this class of middle class came up, and it has increased over time. So what I think, what at least what I would consider middle class and their relation to environment would be, we have talked about extremes. So for poor, it has more political undertones. It's about their right to life. It's about their right to basic needs. While for rich, it is kind of the greenwashing, as once you comment, which is like they buy products which is sold to them as being green and sustainable because they can do so. The middle class is kind of, they take small steps which will affect their niche group. For example, there was a study done on the Bangalore middle class and their relation to environment, and it was shown that they attended bicycle clubs. They went cycling everywhere. They walked to where they wanted to go to, and they did waste management at home. Now, if you see these three things, they are not choices to the poor, right? Because as we saw earlier, they cannot afford cars, means of transportation. They have to walk everywhere, or they have to, if they get a cycle, they have to cycle everywhere. They have to do waste management, use it as compost for their farms or some sort of anything. So, but for the middle class, this becomes a choice. So that's where the transition takes place, I think. So as we move up the strata or the income bracket, it becomes more of choice. We saw the rich has a lot more, the rich have a lot more choices. They can choose to buy water at whatever price it may be. And but the poor has less choices, and the middle class kind of is there in between. Another reason we don't hear much about it, right? And it's not researched much is because they don't get much spotlight unless it affects their group directly. For example, the wildfires in California, when it affected the POC groups, people of color, their areas, not much attention. But when it affected the white middle class region or their residential area, and this white middle class region, they're kind of leading, like at least the environmentalism movement in the US, then it was bought up. And then they were out in the streets, they were protesting, they were talking to people, talking in residential this kind of groups. And that's when that gained attention. So it's not, there's no integration. So far in our discussion, we have talked about three completely different sections of society dealing with environment in their own way. So from what I've read about pieces of middle class environmentalism, all the authors suggest that some form of integration always shows a positive sign. So at least I think that's the way the middle class and the environment sort of relate. Shreya, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to add that I completely agree with you, but I also think that the middle class is a class which is towards the rich because they are in a phase where they're not the poor. So they are able to accept the bulk production, the consumerism which comes with the rich, and they're able to move with that phase. So while they are moving towards a more environmental friendly phase, I feel it's mainly because of the climate change that is taking around us. Because if it wasn't as severe a case as it was today, I don't think the middle class would be moving towards environmental friendly stuff. I think everyone in the end tries to be like, from everyone, money is important. So they try to do as much as they can to be the rich. So while a lot of them, there'd be a handful, pocket of full of people who, yeah, would be environmental friendly. I think the middle class are the type of people who would be aiming to emulate the rich and try to be like them. And that could be rich people who are also environmental friendly and moving towards them. But I think in the end, it's everyone moving towards the extreme of the rich rather than moving towards an integrated world, if it wasn't for climate change.
Yeah, I think I can add to the point where you mentioned how the middle class selectively picked out certain things that affected them, and it captures the popular media and the national media to a great extent, right? Uh, uh, Contrasting it with if people from low income groups were also facing the same, right? So we could see it basically in the first wave of coronavirus in the country, right? A lot of slums were being affected, like uh, slums like Dharavi, slums like other places, etc. A lot of people from these areas were affected, and migrant workers, they had to travel so far back to their homelands, right? They were too affected, but yet it did not reach the media landscape to the extent that the second wave has now reached, which is basically impacting much more people from the middle income category. So I think it echoes your point about the middle class capturing a middle and the higher income class capturing the national media and national, we can say, priorities of allocation of resources.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that related to COVID. Riyosha?
Yeah, I would sort of directly like to respond to Shreya. I sort of disagree with you when you say that the middle class is still trying to emulate the rich, and thus they'll be less inclined towards environmentalism. I feel like middle class environmentalism isn't exactly intentional, but it's a result of their economic status. Because I feel like there's a very strong practice of recycling. Yeah, like you'll see, like if I pinpoint very specific examples, every middle class household will have a plastic bag filled with other plastic bags. You'll have a very strong culture of hand me downs and a very strong culture of recycling and saving. And I think that's not really because of the concern for the environment, but because of their economic status to save money. So it's not exactly intentional, but it is definitely beneficial for the environment. So I did. So that sort of leads to my question. Uh, when we talk about elite environmentalism or upper class environmentalism, and we see that people are going green, the elite classes going green, like we don't discourage that, but it's often found that it doesn't significantly reduce their carbon footprint, right? Like they might go, a lot of the elites might go vegan and might try on a very green lifestyle, but it doesn't significantly reduce their carbon footprint. It does, but like I said, not significantly. So that's my question. Do you think this uh, using public, and that's because of their consumption pattern. Even though they lead a green lifestyle, their consumption pattern, I feel like it overshadows whatever green lifestyle they're leading. So that's my question. Like, do you think that using public transport, recycling, composting, and proper waste management system, do you think it has a significant impact when we talk about middle class consumption patterns? Do you think it, like we talk about the green lifestyle of the elite, do you think that this has a significant middle class environmentalism in this way has a significant impact?
I think at least it's starting to have more impact, right? But at first glance, I thought the fact that they were kind of, appropriating what the poor do with without a choice was kind of negative, but I feel it has kind of a positive connotation in the fact that they're kind of destigmatizing it, right? So oh yeah, yeah. So in Bangalore, at least, when these researchers, they were talking to these waste management groups, or these like residential waste management groups made up of middle class communities. They communicated with the Dalits in the area who are otherwise picking waste, and it kind of changed their mindset. So I think that's like little sparks of integration there. So in that sense, I think it is making a difference because there is a little bit of integration which comes with proper waste management, which comes with whatever they're trying from their side, even though sometimes it has a negative.
uh, I think your point, it somehow points to, you know, uh, heckling the individual, right? You are responsible for whatever is happening to the environment, kind of an undertone, right? Especially middle class family engaging in all sorts of recycling, etc. It's actually diverting the much greater concern at hand that large corporates are doing, right? Basically the things are at that crux, not at the individual level. Yes, it can bring in certain amount of change, but the real problems lie at the helm of corporates, and how they structure their businesses, large businesses, how they operate, not individuals. Heckling individuals, I think, would be of less consequence than the former.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point because right now we were just focusing on how individual lifestyle changes make a difference when it's not really the case. Like individual differences won't really make a huge difference. Noor, do you want to go next?
Yeah, obviously the fact that like the way you talked about how a lot of it comes from their need to save stuff, I think it's also, I mean, another reason is that I do agree with Shreya's point that no one who like, we are sort of in a culture where we need things to sort of make us feel happy. We are taught that okay, if you get this device or you get, the throwaway economy or the, planned obsolescence of the things we get. I mean, we are sort of, that's been drilled into our heads that our happiness would come from buying this product, right? So a lot of times, no one who is like, in a particular economic class would want to stay there. They are obviously like trying to move upwards, and the motion upwards is usually dictated by your ownership of these things, right? Which is sort of done by marketing or branding or the way these luxury goods are sort of given to us. Also, the fact that when we talk about we need to make a change, we never picture ourselves as the we think it's a group of people who are outside, or a group of people who are not, I mean, in like separate from us, who has to do this. So, and we're also like, even in our textbooks we are taught that overpopulation is the reason why more waste is generated, or why the industries are influencing us to buy stuff. So like we are never taught that the we is us. So I think where it's the interplay of these two things that sort of like makes me believe that it's not necessarily their need to sort of conserve the environment, rather their own personal economic needs that sort of force them to save.
Yeah, Shreya.
I completely agree with Noor and Kashana, and that's why my reason of saying that the middle class is moving towards the rich, even though we have like these individual values of recycle, reuse, rewaste, and so on, which is in the middle class family, it won't matter if the product itself is going to be not recyclable. And people don't realize that they don't equate environmental friendly products equal to luxury. For them, environmental friendly products is always something which is not going to be equal to luxury. And that's why companies like Nike, Adidas, which try to produce environmental friendly shoes, use reusable waste for their shoes, it didn't pick up that much traction because people never saw reusable shoes as something which they want to wear, as something they're paying so much money for to just get something which was already used. For them, that's not luxury. Luxury is something brand new, taken out, used. And that's why I feel like it would never work unless we change the definition of what is a luxury good, what is an environmental friendly good, and merge the two. So make it an integration of consumers and producers. to get everyone working towards the same definition of what all these things actually mean.
So I think from where we left off, it's just like it comes back to the point that everyone is self motivating and political by the end of the day. So, when you guys were talking about the middle class environmentalism, it actually struck me about the entire movement against waste incinerators in Delhi NCR. So, these were like middle class families that came out on the streets for the first time to say that, we will segregate our waste and stop putting these waste incinerators in our colony because they were causing them major harm. And I think it's really like that entire movement was really important because it was actually one of the very few movements that integrated even the labor and the environment. So they were like, we'll make sure that the waste pickers of our colony are provided with enough resources and pay. So I think in that sense, middle class environmentalism paints a very positive picture. But then by the end of the day, they were indulging individuals and households who had come out to the street to say that we don't want to live in such conditions. So I think you know, it's really important that we realize what role we're playing in the society. And, we see that nature is not unique to us, right? So if I'm breathing air, it's not for me, it's for everyone. If I'm using a water resource, it's not just me who's consuming it. And I think unlearning these notions is very important, which I think India's policies at the moment have failed to address. India's policies are just like, oh, let's economically motivate people to, switch to waste segregation. Let's economically motivate people to, buy certain products by taxing them less. But there's enough, like, even environmental economics sort of, proves that none of this can really, like, while all of these are like theoretically and, blackboard economically, proven to be socially optimum welfare points, but economies as a whole are not moving towards it. I think I'll let you guys know about the German Green Dot program. You guys should read into it. Sounds like a fantastic idea. This third party jumping in saying that, we're going to take care of countries' entire recycling. Sounds like this, superheroes jumped in to like save the day and say that we'll take the responsibility of it. But when you read up on it, you realize how self motivated they were, which led to the entire program actually failing. And Germany's like Green Dot program, it has a lot of papers on it, like easily available. So I think we need to like realize that by the end of the day, everyone's gonna perceive of environment by the way that they've grown up looking at it and hearing about it. So whether that's the rich, the middle class, or the poor, and it's gonna mean different things to them because of which they're gonna engage with it differently. What we can do from our end, as students, especially as researchers, is to make sure that we read up enough on everyone's different point of views so that tomorrow when we have a say, you know we either put our feet down and say that no, we got to bring a more diverse group into this discussion on policy and into this discussion of what to do with this resource, or we are we are aware of just the different ways in which everyone engages with it. Think I'd just like to thank everyone for this wonderful discussion, guys. It was lovely, and we could have actually gone throughout the day. I'm sorry we have to end it so quickly. Thank you so much.